Good afternoon, class. We are back, or I should say I'm back with you to discuss, to put some finishing touches on a few points that I didn't have time to make today in class as we were talking about the cursus honorum and its significance to the social order and the way in which opportunity and social power, political power, were organized during the period of the Roman Republic. So I want to start here just to refresh us as to what our day's objective was. There are a couple of you who missed class. I'll just quickly click through the slides. You can pause and spend a little time here if you want for your notes. Although, as is oftentimes the case, these slides make a little more sense if you're in class and hearing the annotations or discussions associated with the slides. We spent some time today looking at the early experience of Rome. We discussed a couple periods, pretty simplistic at this point, but we just divided the history of Roman civilization, which spans about 1,000 years. We divided it between its Republican period, which lasted from roughly 509 BCE to the middle 1st century BCE. And then we discussed how the Roman Empire, which is what we most often associate our understanding of Roman civilization with, we identified that as spanning from midway through the 1st century BCE to 476 current era. Rome's important for a number of ways, but of course at the heart of this is the fact that it's really part of the Roman the experience of the Roman Empire, and it's in the Roman Empire where the birth of Christianity takes place. All the events associated with the life of Jesus take place right smack dab in the middle of this Roman experiment, the republics and the empire. So today we were talking about some of the institutions that were central to understanding the Roman Republic. And one of the things that the Romans, one of the truly authentic or original contributions of the ancient Roman Republic is this idea of a republic. And a republic, I believe I said in class, is essentially a political system whereby a small group of leaders, in this case a very small group, 2 consuls, are held accountable by a slightly larger group. And the slightly larger group that we're talking about for most of the Roman Republic is the Roman Senate. But it's worth noting there's no king, so to speak. The closest thing we have to a king is the consul. And I'll more on them in just a minute. And there's also this idea of accountability. This is not a truly democratic system by any means. In fact, it's less democratic than the political leadership or the political framework or system employed by the ancient Greeks in the city-states like Athens. But nonetheless, it still speaks a little bit to our current experiment in American Republican government of the early 21st century. So we talked about the patricians, the plebeians. These are the 2 major social classes. The plebeians are much larger than the patricians. However, the patricians have quite a bit more political and social power, which is oftentimes the case when we talk about the wealthy and the well-educated, so on and so forth. But we left off today talking about the cursus honorum. And the cursus honorum is this idea and this ideal path that any young Roman male would aspire to follow, and this would be their path into opportunity within the Roman Republic. And it involves a number of different offices, and we're looking at institutions that were at the heart of the success of the Roman Republic. And I want to start by saying one of the really interesting ideas, concepts, or principles that is at the heart of the Roman Republic is this idea of imperium. And the word imperium itself sounds like a lot of other words, not the least of which would be empire. But imperium means something very specific. And imperium is something that we probably take for granted, but imperium means to what I say, or what it means is that what I say goes. If someone has imperium, they have the authority that their decision is one that will be followed. And what's important to understand at the heart of this Roman Republic is that there were two individuals that had imperium. They were called the consuls, and they were given power and office for a one-year basis, and really what they said went, for the most part. They had the power, and what they said was to be essentially the way in which Roman society or the Roman political system would follow and listen and obey their directives. But they were also held accountable or held in check by this powerful body of people known as the Roman Senate. And so the way this worked, the cursus honorum was the path that you would take to arrive someday as a powerful member of Roman society. And there were many stops along the way. You had to do things you had to follow a rather narrow path if you hope to land at this place of power and privilege. Starting with, as a young child, you would be expected to learn to read and write, to become accomplished in your school. Then you would be expected to serve in the Roman military. You would probably do that for somewhere between 2 and 6 years. If you distinguished yourself well in the military, then you could hope to perhaps find a public office at a later date. And these are where some of these offices along this diagram, which is trying to show us the cursus honorum. So if you're a member of the patrician class, you would begin and probably become a quaestor. And a quaestor was essentially someone who is like a financial bureaucrat. In the Roman Republic, one of the real secrets to the Roman success was that they were able to collect taxes. And collecting taxes required a lot of different things. Not only did it require discipline and the Roman people being willing to give their taxes, but it also required rather impressive governmental officials or bureaucrats who could do two things. One, collect the taxes, but two, also correctly assess the wealth of a given person or household so that the taxes that were set upon that household were an accurate reflection of what that person could afford and also what they could give in a somewhat willing way, right? If you're overtaxed, that's not really a sustainable situation. So the quaestors were really important to that, and they relied upon sort of the brightest and the best of Roman young men to sort of help provide that. If you could do that for a couple of years, then you could move up. Now the curule or aedile, there were two of these individuals at any time. You can see here there are 20 quaestors. So this is kind of a funneling up toward opportunity. And the aedile are people who essentially oversee the public life of Roman society. So we know that the Romans had rather impressive public places, like they have the Forum, they have the Colosseum. Later on, they're going to have the Hippodrome, places where there are chariot races, various mausoleums, which are essentially buildings that are built to honor past leaders within Rome. So as someone who sort of oversees that space and organizes these public events, you could do that for a period of time to move yourself up. Then we get to the praetors. Praetors were important people. By later on in the Republic, sometimes people from the plebeian class could get onto the cursus honorum and become a praetor just as well as the patricians could. But this cursus honorum, again, it's funneling you toward the opportunity of being among the highest members of Roman society. Finally, if you've acquitted yourself well at all of these stops, you may be so fortunate as to be elected consul. Consul, there were two of them at any given time. They were given the power or the authority of imperium, so what they said went. But the challenge with being a consul is that after you serve your 1-year term as a consul that you will then move on into the Senate. And so knowing where you're going after you serve as consul is going to have a real sort of, let's say, moderating effect. You're not going to try anything crazy as a consul because you're going to spend the rest of your life rubbing elbows with these other powerful people in the Senate. So one of the things that having the consul move into the Senate did was it allowed the Senate actually a lot more power than you might think, because they knew that ultimately these consuls are going to be answering to them and they're going to be peers of them. Okay. The other thing that's important here, another office that I've overlooked, is the censor. And the censor is critical because the censor would be someone who, sort of like the praetor. Praetor had a little bit more of a judge and sort of law enforcement role, but also sometimes had to do with the finances of the republic. The censors for sure were responsible for carrying out assessing people's wealth and how much they could afford to pay, how many people are in a household. If you wanted to be a good member of Roman society, you wanted the censors to think well of you because they could say things like, this man is not very well in charge of his family, his wife is having adulterous affairs, or his children are poorly behaved. These were all things that the censor could say, and they would affect your place within society. It was kind of spooky in some ways, all right? But not altogether different from, in Walla Walla today. If people are saying bad things behind your back, that stuff oftentimes gets around and can be a negative reflection upon you and your family. So this is an important part, the cursus honorum, and people would move up and through this system based on how well they performed at each level within this cursus honorum. One of the things that we're going to notice is that the struggle of the orders, which we'll be talking about a little bit both tomorrow and Wednesday, the struggle of the orders is a period of social tension that's going on in the background of the Roman Republic, the period of the Roman Republic. And essentially what's happening is through this 500 years or so of time, the plebeian class is growing in its power relative to the patricians. So the patricians, in order to keep the plebeians behaved and keeping them from overthrowing and rioting and revolting against the patrician class, have to increasingly give them greater opportunity. And so I'll speak to this and then call it good. These are important developments in the overall struggle of the orders, this centuries-long struggle between the patrician and plebeian class. First off, rather early, just 36 years into the Republic, already the plebeian class forms its own council, which allows the plebs or the plebeians to pass rules for the plebeian class within the Roman Republic. That's a really important thing. The law of the 12 tables is passed in 450 BCE, which becomes sort of a written governmental piece, so it sort of helps restrict the power of the patricians, because now there's a record of sort of the rights of Roman members of Roman society. So this sort of helps serve as a form of assurance for the plebeians who had previously been sort of taken advantage of by the patricians. In 445 BC, it becomes legal for a plebeian to marry a member of the patrician class. By 367 BCE, we have the first example of a plebeian who enters the cursus honorum from that on-ramp that you saw earlier. Well, now it's possible for a plebeian to actually aspire as high as the level of consul, and that becomes a major breakthrough. And then finally in 287 BCE, these are just a handful of examples, it becomes possible for the plebeian assembly to no longer just pass laws for the plebes themselves, but for all of Roman society. And with that, I'll stop and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks.